Most Boston neighborhoods have their stories of hardship and hope. Last year, the Boston Globe went looking for those stories in the Dorchester neighborhood of Bowdoin, Geneva. Our guest has worked that same neighborhood, but over a different time. He grew up in what was more commonly referred to as St. Peter's Parish, but his book draws primarily on material from another neighborhood institution, a drinking place on Bowdoin Street that was also a listening post and bulletin board. The book's called Danny's Tavern. We'd like to welcome the author, Tom Melvin. Thank you very much for being with us, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
So talk about how you got from just being a kid in the neighborhood to the person who would write this kind of a book.
Well, I grew up in the neighborhood, and I went to a parochial school, and then I went to a high school, which closed down the year after I left, Commerce High, and then I went into the service. And when I was discharged from the service, what do you do? And I thought I would go to college, and I thought I'd go to sea and see the world, because both of my fathers, my real father, my stepfather, were Newfoundland fishermen. Anyway, I went to Mass Maritime, and I didn't like it, and I left, and I went to BU and studied aerospace engineering, which was a good major. It was really a tough course, but I got a good background in that, and then I just began the trail of jobs. I think part of my my personality was I wasn't of the ilk to join IBM forever. I've always changed jobs a lot, sometimes for the good and sometimes not for the good. But I've developed a lot of different backgrounds that I choose from. Now, the reason I drank in Eddie's when I was...
This is the Eddie's Tavern, the real life basis of
I
Danny's.
Drank in the tavern on Saturday afternoons when you're in your 20s. And then you get married, and for a long time, on a Saturday afternoon, we went back to Eddie's, and it was a pure joy. Everything was tell jokes. I mean, forget the politically incorrect or what have you. If someone was insulted by a joke, it might end up a fist fight. But in general, it was give and take. And they were one of the most enjoyable times in my life. And then, of course, things move on, and you get involved in your job and your family, and how do you support them. And so I always loved to read. And I said, I think, it seemed like I just threw out Danny's, over a weekend. But I thought about a tavern, about that particular. Actually, it could be any tavern maybe in the northeast part of the United States that had a basis of people working in factories and so on and so forth. But these people, different ages, and they're from the four corners of the earth. I mean, my stepfather hunted seals. You had people in every conceivable construction field you could imagine. People immigrated from Ireland. A fellow gets a job as a carpenter or gets on the MBTA.
Or you have an Armenian shopkeeper who comes in for 2 glasses of wine.
You have, those people do exist. And they invite their friends, and you got these cliques. And I said, okay, let me try this. So I wrote it. Actually, I wrote a story, Two Winds to Vandalia. It was about 2 brothers, and they were working at a nuclear plant, and it was horrible. Thank God, I still have it, but I decided I'd write this, and I wrote Danny's, and I tried to publish it through a regular publisher, and I couldn't. And so finally, I said, let me study writing. And I studied. That's where some of the short stories came from, like The Wedding of Rags Maloney. Right. That was a short story. And I wrote that, and then meanwhile, I was in school at night. I had already had a degree in aeronautical engineering, but I was taking courses more or less on the liberal arts side. And I said, okay, let me, and I'm in construction. And I said, you know, maybe I should write about the psychology of construction, the psychology of construction management. Like, when I looked at Eddie's Tavern, I saw the diversity of people, personalities, jobs, and what have you. Construction has that same setup. You've got architects who are very interested in the creative. You've got contractors who are interested in, you know, how you build it. And then you have the owners who are trying to get the best for their money. And there's a lot of psychology involved. And these people have different personalities that you could sort of measure that with a psych test. So I wrote like a 10-page synopsis, sent it to Van Nostrand, and they sent me back a $1,500 contract to write the book. And that took me about a year, and that was in 1979. So one thing that did for me, I mean, the fact that now I'm an author, big deal. Once you do something, that's the end of it. What do I do with that? So meanwhile, I had Danny's Tavern, the original typed version, and I gave a copy to that fellow I mentioned previously that owns, he's an accountant. He put it in the trunk of his car. And so when he found out that, well, let me back up. My son, at the beginning of a year ago, said, Dad, with now all of the electronic publishing, why don't you resurrect Danny's Tavern? And I said, great idea, Tim. It was easier said than done. But it's funny, George, the accountant, when I mentioned I was going to write the book, he said, you know, I still have the original copy that you gave me. He said, in fact, every time I buy a new car, I take it out of the trunk and put it in the new car.
This is a book that is shadowed by the Depression because the bar goes back to 1935. Lots of people with potential they were never able to play out. And yes, they got jobs in the building trades. Wonderful description here about roofing. It's almost like Orwell in the coal mines. This is a terrible job, and you just describe it in so much harrowing detail.
Well, when you do it, you have the elements to describe. I mean, but you do it, and pretty soon, in a way, you might get trapped into a job. You might be earning good money, and then all of a sudden your family's growing, and you're trapped in there. And there's a lot of camaraderie too. There's also enough of danger in it, but you do it because that's your job.
Right. We should mention, Tom, if there's any people who want to take this up, look for it online or elsewhere, is there some place that they should give that a try?
What, the book itself?
Sure.
I think it's, well, the Kindle. From my point of view, the book, the paper copy, is like $26. For me, I would suggest you buy the Kindle. It's like $3 if you have a Kindle machine. And it's the same thing. In fact, Kindle is easier to read.
And it works in other tablets as well. Thank you very much for being with us. Tom Melvin, author of Danny's Tavern. We'll have more news in just a moment.